Welcome to another bonus episode of Hockey Inside Out, and this is one that I love because it comes from you. We want as many viewer questions as possible this year, so leave a comment below on our YouTube channel and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So this one's actually coming from X, formerly known as Twitter. Mick has sent this in. When do you think the rebuild ends and the team should start to focus on competing? Andrew, what do you think about this?
I think there's a couple of years away. In terms of competing, I think as of next season, they'll probably start pushing and the focus will change. You'll see less of excessive playing of guys like Armia or Hoffman last year, where they're trying to build some trade value and like that being a lot of the focus game to game. You're going to see a lot more of the young kids break into the lineup. I almost wonder if it in terms of being a playoff team, I feel like they're not going to get to that level until Lane Hudson hits the NHL. I think they need some more dynamic offense. So unless Juraj Slafkovsky blows us away at the latter half of this year and becomes the player that we expect from a first overall pick, I think it takes at least another year. And I don't think the Canadiens should feel rushed either, because I do think they do need some elite talent in the roster through whatever avenue.
Pro athletes are always going to compete, so the compete level is always going to be there. The question is, when will they have enough talent, as Andrew said, to be a legitimate playoff team? And they always talk about rebuilds like a 5-year plan. This is the second full year of this rebuild, and they've made it. When you look at the work Kent Hughes has done, getting rid of bad contracts and stockpiling draft picks, he's done a really good job so far in that aspect. We've said in one of the early episodes, we don't think they're going to make the playoffs this year. Next year, I think it's legitimate that they can contend to make the playoffs, but I think they're 3 years away from being where they wanted to get to when this new management team took over. So that'd be like year 4 of the rebuild. I think by that point, they want to be making the playoffs and building towards, as Jeff Gorton said, the plan was right from the beginning, not just to make the playoffs one year, but to be a team that's in the playoffs every year and consistently competing. So I think they're 3 years away roughly from that. 4 years to if you want to go the full 5-year thing, they should be then at the point where they're ready to compete, they're ready to be in the playoffs, they're ready to be a good team. And if they're not, well, that's when people will start looking at the GM and the director of hockey operations and whatnot and wondering if these guys are the right guys in place. But what they've done so far is really impressive.
And I think the end of the rebuild, if you will, is once they start to rack up more wins and losses consistently. And to put your figure on a time frame, I mean, the reality is you look at the youth of their organization in games played. Another year, the expectation this year is improvement. Next year should be even that much better. And that will coincide with how they find ways to win hockey games, and how the young guys develop that are supposed to be goal scorers score their 20 goals a year. And you have to be patient a little bit because they are young, and give them some time. But the results are the bottom line here, in understanding the rebuild is just about near the end, and they consistently show up and compete, and end result being that they're doing more winning than losing and get a chance to get in the playoffs.
And look, I don't want to be a negative Nancy here, but I feel like my entire life, I'm 35 years old, so it's been, I missed really the glory years of the Canadiens, but they've been rebuilding. Every single management or retooling or something. There hasn't been
patchwork, though.
A lot of patchwork.
It was all patchwork. It was like, let's just try and get in the playoffs this season. It wasn't, let's be a team that's going to be in the playoffs every season. And it was patchwork. Mark Bergevin was just plugging a hole here, plugging a hole there, plugging a hole there. There was no real plan in place. And it's easy to blame Mark Bergevin, but the ownership has to sign off on that also, right? So Jeff Molson decided to sign off on a rebuild, and this is a full rebuild. And, we're talking about how long. Well, the core group of this team are all 22, 23, 24 years old. That's not by mistake. They're getting all guys in the same age group. So 3-4 years from now, they're all 26, 27. They should be in their prime. That's like the prime age for a hockey player, 26, 27 in that area. So there's thinking behind this. It's not, there's a long range plan. They're sticking to their long range plan as opposed to just like, well, if we do this, maybe we'll get in the playoffs this year. We'll give up assets. Don't worry about that. And maybe we'll get in the playoffs next year. And that hasn't, as you said, Jess, for someone your age, I grew up when the Stanley Cup parade was every year down St. Catherine Street, but for the fan group of your age, it's just been, let's try and get in the playoffs and see what happens. But I think patience is a virtue, and it'll be a virtue for fans here if and when they get to the point where they're in the playoffs every year. It's almost a taken for granted. This team is going to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, well, I think we need to put context on like this era of Canadiens history. If it weren't for COVID and the play-in rounds, they'd have missed the playoffs every year since 2017.
Yeah.
Like they had to do a rebuild. It got to the point where they really bottomed out. The Canadiens have never missed the playoffs, I believe, more than 3 years in a row.
And I think this management group is obviously keying in on character through player selection that they see as a long-term type of personnel that they want to have part of it. And, the rest is development and keeping their finger on the pulse, if you will, on these kids that are supposed to develop in the good way and develop good habits. They're making sure that that is happening and give the ones that they've selected every opportunity to get better and eventually contribute in the long term of the Montreal Canadiens. So they're going about it the right way. It's painful, but time will tell, and they have some good character potential kids that are going to be fun to entertain us and show a lot of good things on the ice.
And it's a different world too. I mean, back in the 70s, 80s, when I was saying there was a Stanley Cup parade almost every year, there was no salary cap. I mean, the Canadiens could never have kept that group together back then. It would have been impossible. There was fewer teams in the league. It was easier to make the playoffs. The NHL, just making the playoffs now is an accomplishment in the NHL. It takes like 100 points just to get in. So it's different worlds. The older generation like me that were spoiled, it was a different world back then. Guy Lafleur and Steve Shutt and Larry Robinson and Serge Savard and Ken Dryden. You'd never have all those guys on the same team. It'd be impossible to keep them in the salary cap.
Well, I really hope I'm wrong, and this is the final time I have to hear the word rebuild or retool or something like that around the Montreal Canadiens. And if you like more news on the Montreal Canadiens, just go to hockeyinsideout.com.